It's my pleasure to welcome MPP for Kingston and the Islands, Ted Hsu, here with us today. Ted, welcome. It's so nice to have you here in our studio.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, I think so often when we think about our elected officials, government leaders, we sort of lose sight of where they came from. And so much, I think, of our upbringing, our childhood experiences, our experiences as young adults really shape who we are. So I'd like to start there, if you don't mind, with a little bit about your childhood and perhaps how it shaped you into the person you are today.
Well, growing up in Kingston is a big part of who I am and even how I do politics. I think we have a kind of different view of things than somebody that might have grown up in a big city. But some of my memories are when I was a kid, I used to watch, and I saw the poster in the studio, the Nova poster. When I was a kid, I used to watch Nova, and that's in my preteen years. That's one of the ways that I got interested in science, and I watched it on WNP, WNVI, I think, which is what this WPBS used to be called. So that's one of the memories that I have. And the other one is I would say that is really kind of something that you do in this region is fishing. So this is something we used to do as a family. We'd go out to one of the locks up the Rideau system, or later we got a rowboat and we'd go out as a family and go fishing. And the fishing is good in this region. I think people, it's something that when we had visitors, my parents' friends would come. It's something they would come and do. Is come for the fishing.
So I'm picturing young Ted watching Nova, being inspired by what he was seeing scientifically. What ultimately led you down the path of physics? Because you're a physicist, correct?
Yeah. Well, I guess when I was young, my first interest in science was in astronomy. I was really interested in the stars and the planets, and I would take out all these books from the library, and I'd listen to watch the science shows and listen to the ones on the radio. Physics is related to that because it explains why the stars and the planets do what they do, and it also explains why your TV works. And so that's how I got interested in physics.
I'm curious to know how your expertise in physics may influence or impact in any way your role as an elected official.
Well, when you have a science background, you can stick your nose into all sorts of things. I used to be a federal MP, and I had the science and technology kind of critic, they call it the critic role, which means you tell the government what they could do better. But as the science and technology critic, I could stick my nose into all sorts of things. So, for example, not only funding for science research, but I would stick my nose into research on justice policies, because that was covered by the same research funding. I could stick my nose into the propane shortage and the census and how business used that or retailers use that to locate their businesses. You get involved in healthcare and education. So it's very interesting in that it allows you to contribute to a lot of different areas that use science or use research in some other way. So that's kind of from a policy point of view. But from like how to do politics, I would say there's a lot of influence in that as well. And I think the biggest influence is as a scientist. Now, scientists are human, so they're not always humble, but you can always be a better scientist by being more humble. And by saying, oh, maybe I'm wrong, I better go back and do my homework and check. Or maybe I better listen to this person who I don't agree with, because they could probably teach me something, or maybe they know something that I don't. And that is also part of science and being a scientist, and that influences how I do politics. So I'm seen as a not so much of a partisan attack dog kind of person, but as a more thoughtful, let's think about what the other side is saying, and maybe we can do better ourselves.
Right. Scientists are trained to be thoughtful and analytical and weigh the facts. And so, yeah, I could see how that would apply nicely to the world of government. Yeah. And one might argue government could use more scientists in its midst.
Well, I would legislating. The people who work in government and people who work in science could learn from each other, for sure.
Do other scientists ever approach you and ask about getting into politics. Is that
Yeah.
a thing? Do you advocate for them to take that route?
There aren't that many scientists in politics. And so when there are people who are interested, they often get sent to me. And one of the things I tell scientists is you have to learn how to communicate and explain what you want to do. So you can't just say, oh, here's the problem. Here's the ideal solution. This is what we're going to do. Listen to me, I'm right. You can't do that in politics. You can only do what you can explain to voters and get them to understand and feel like, okay, and they have to give you permission to do those things. So as a scientist, again, this is part of being humble. You can really only do what you can explain, but the more that you can explain, the more that you can do. And that applies to all politicians. But scientists have to stop and say, yeah, the perfect solution, that whatever you think is the perfect solution, can't necessarily do that. You have to you have to meet voters where they are, speak in their language, explain it to them from their point of view. And that determines whether you can be successful in politics or not.
When was the moment did you decide that you were going to make that switch? And you're a physicist, you've worked in the banking industry. Mm-hmm. When did you decide I'm interested in pursuing a career in politics?
Well, I would say when I first got interested in politics and government, I think my wife started me off when she introduced me to this market tools, sort of like financial markets, but it was greenhouse gas markets, emissions markets, they call them, to have as a way of managing climate change and managing our emissions of greenhouse gases in a way that's sort of fair and less costly. So that was the first thing that got me going and thinking about public policy. And it was also my daughter was born, our first daughter was born, and I spent a couple of years as a stay-at-home dad and started thinking about her future and what we needed to do more than just feed her, clothe her, read to her, play with her teacher. There was just all these big challenges out there. And that's what got me interested in government. And then, a lot of times in politics, when I actually decided to run, it's an accident. Somebody retires, timing just happens to be right. And it really was an accident. And or part of it is maybe I just didn't even think that carefully about, can I do this? I said, this and somebody is retired, the incumbent is retired, there's an opening, I should put my name for it and see what happens. So it was that combination of feeling that politics and government was important after I kind of took my nose off the grindstone in the work world, but also just a bunch of things lined up, and then I took a bit of a leap, and I had support from my family, mostly my wife. Yeah.
Important, though.
Important.
This is important work and busy work and stressful work, to imagine.
Yeah.
You tell us about it. It's. I don't think it's a typical trajectory. You were a member of Parliament, and now you're a member of Provincial Parliament of Ontario. So you went from Ottawa, and from at the federal level, and now working more regionally. Tell us about that transition and how it's different.
So the transition, it's not typical. Most people move from provincial to federal. Yeah, that's right. Although I have to say the first woman to serve in the Ontario legislature went that way. So what happened was in 2015, I had served a term as a federal MP, and at that time, I realized that it wasn't right for my family for me to run again. We had 2 young kids, and maybe it was how people have different skill sets. Maybe it was how I did the job, whatever. I felt I couldn't run again, and so I didn't in 2015. And then the provincial seat opened up in 2020, and so we realized that our kids were older. My oldest daughter's in university now. My younger daughter is going into high school, and so I realized I could run again, and so I put my name in. They are somewhat different. So one difference is on the federal level in Ottawa, you've got these regional differences: Quebec and Atlantic Canada, Ontario, prairies, and British Columbia. Really, there's a lot of push and pull, and different needs from these different regions that you have to try to balance. Things move a lot slower. On the provincial level, there's a lot of immediate problems. So people coming and say, I can't afford the rent increase next month. I don't have a family doctor. My kids had to evacuate their classroom because there was a disruptive kid in the class. Very, very immediate needs characterize work as a provincial politician. But there is something in common, which is that the biggest, most important problems, and for that I would say affordability, lack of affordable housing, lack of primary care, family doctors, disruption in education, climate change, all these big problems require collaboration between different levels of government. Every level of government, federal, provincial, municipal, indigenous government, has to be involved. And so I get to work on these really hard problems that I want to work on, even though I'm representing my community at a provincial level.
I'm going to give you a challenging question. In one sentence, what legacy do you hope to leave?
I want to leave my community better than it otherwise would be. It is, now I get to do more sentences maybe.
Go ahead.
It's just, you're only one person, so you're not going to save the world on your own. And things may get better, things may get worse. And so, things are not so good now. It looks like it wouldn't be unreasonable to suppose that when I'm finished my time in politics, things could actually be worse, because a lot of things are not going in the right direction. So all I can really hope for is to try to make things better than they otherwise would be. People have better access to a family doctor, or the schools are working better, kids are learning better, workers are more productive, so that we can sort of fight this affordability problem, things like that.
And we know you'll keep up the good fight. MPP Ted Hsu, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Good to be here. Thank you.